Hey guys, my name is Annie Stoll. Today I wanted to draw Sabine Wren from Star Wars Rebels. I had the super privilege of being able to draw her for Sabine, my Rebel Sketchbook, which was this really cool kind of sketch diary with Lucasfilm. And then again, this past year, I was able to do some more drawings with her with this book called Women of the Galaxy, which is pretty rad. I really love this character a lot. You can see that I've started with a very, very rough sketch. This already took me maybe like 3 minutes to do, and what I really like about this character is that she uses art as a way to express herself, and I very much relate to that. So yeah, let's dive right in. I did this sketch with this Blackwing pencil, which I quite like a lot. It's got this cool little eraser and the lead is just really great. So when I do a sketch, I like to use my whole arm. I think you can see that I like to do a lot of gestures and really think about my composition. I also think it's good, especially if you're drawing a licensed character, to have some references to make sure you're getting all the details just right. So I actually brought some references with me just to kind of hang out. I know a lot of people say, oh, you gotta draw from memory, but I think it's really useful to have a friend come and do a pose for you or look at some cool images that you find online. Obviously you don't want to copy them, but it's good to make sure you have the correct details, like for instance her cute little owl. When I'm refining a drawing, I don't want to go too much into it. I really just want to keep it loose and think to myself, like, what are the structures going to be? So what I'm going to do with this is I printed out a Starbird and I'm going to make a little bit of a stencil and show you guys how to sort of rough and dirty do a little bit of graffiti. I think that when you make your own textures, it makes something look really authentic and awesome. So what I just did is took a piece of this Yupo paper. It's real weird feeling and kind of slick, but you can see underneath it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of do my own rough version of this Starbird, and I'm going to cut this real quick. I think when you're doing graffiti or any kind of art that has to have an urgency to it, you can't be too precious. You just gotta have a little bit of fun. Alright. There we go. This is a very, very rough outline. This is pretty awesome. This paper is called render paper and it does not bleed underneath it at all. It's real cool. It'll catch all this paint. Sometimes in life things don't go as we plan. So you know what? We're gonna take something else and do something equally cool and weird and grungy. These are Crink markers. They're made in New York. They're really, really cool. I quite like them. And they also are very, very nuclear. So I'm just gonna make some really fast marks. And you can see that I'm pressing down here and letting go, which is allowing me to have these really interesting, strange marks. When I was younger, I used to think, oh man, I don't draw perfectly straight lines, I really want to be this amazing inker, and I just wasn't great at it. And then I kind of realized, I just gotta be myself, and I'm kind of messy, and that's alright. So as an artist, I think when you're finding things about yourself that you like and discover, embrace that. It's cool. So here we go. You can see that I've got this little rough Starbird. I'm gonna let this chill out a little bit. I'm gonna come back to it. Let's hang out with Sabine for a bit. So I like all different kinds of brush pens. I think that they're really, really fun, and you can see that they're very expressive. You can kind of punch down and go light. This is probably my favorite one. This is a Pentel Pocket Brush pen. What I like about it is it kind of really adapts to your own hand. You've been watching me draw for a little bit, so you can see that I have a very heavy hand and pretty darn messy. But I've seen people with really wonderful pen pressure draw with this pen, and it looks completely different. Which is, again, I think important to just kind of practice and try new things. Maybe it looks kind of intimidating or scary to you, but it might actually be really cool and you might end up really liking it. Part of the way that I like to draw is I like to keep the underdrawing as an element. I think that that's really kind of cool, and when you look at Sabine as a character, you really get to see how much she puts into all the art that she makes, and I like seeing that construction. It's something I've always really been fascinated with. If you know anything about Sabine, you know that she's from Mandalore, and a lot of the art in Mandalore is inspired by the Cubists. Not obviously in canon, but from an art directing standpoint. It's fun to be inspired by other eras of art and see how that influences the, IPs that you also like. So in this drawing, I haven't gotten to draw Sabine with a Darksaber yet, so I kind of wanted to use this opportunity to do that. I think it's really cool and badass when she gets this sword and has this like whole moment with it. And it's like a lightsaber, but it's sort of like the opposite weird energy of it. It's so cool. And it's like not a lot of people can wield it, and she can, and I really, really like that. So I want to kind of play around with that a little bit. And you can see that my lines are getting a little bit more expressive to kind of feel that like panic, but then also like her assuredness in the moment. I'm gonna switch to this brush pen, which I got at a Japanese bookstore in New York, which is really cool. It's for calligraphy, and you can see that I've kind of like really messed up the tip, and despite that, it still has very good pressure. I like doing the little tiny details with this because it has the appeal of a brush, but I could be just a little bit more precise with my movements. Well, you're probably wondering how I got to draw stuff for Star Wars, which is like, for me, one of the coolest things ever. Like, I still kind of pinch myself every day about that. A while back, I went to New York Comic Con and I actually crashed a pencilers and inkers portfolio review. They were looking for people that have skills that I do not possess, but I thought, you know what, somebody there does graphic design. I'll go and I'll ask, like, what's the worst thing that someone can tell you? No? Cool, you move on. So I went out and I brought my graphic design portfolio, and I had like a couple of like sketches, but really I just kind of wanted to like learn more about, how they do things. And I met this really awesome art director who had this great conversation about graphic design and like bands and things like that. My day job is doing music work, and so it turned into this like really great conversation, and I got his information and I followed up with him and I heard nothing back, and I was like, oh crap, like that sucks. But you know what, I'm gonna write him a follow-up email. You never know, right? I wrote him a follow-up email, and right away he had a gig for me, and it's a good lesson in not being afraid to ask questions, and then not being afraid to like follow up if you don't hear from somebody right away. And so yeah, I started doing gigs for them, which was really cool, and I worked on like a bunch of design for merchandise. One of them was a bunch of like ugly Christmas sweaters, which I still see people around wearing, which is like super cool and like blows my mind because I got to like, put some cool little nerdy stuff into the design. And yeah, so when I would do my little drawings and designs with this art director, I would also do little doodles in the margins, and I think he remembered that. And so when Star Wars Rebels came up and there was this book called Sabine's Rebel Sketchbook, he pitched me for it because I already kind of had this, I guess, in his mind, Sabine way of drawing, which was like so cool. So let's see, I want to give her a little bit of like a shade and a color. This paper is very absorbent, so whatever I do, it's gonna really like kind of fill up, and I'm not gonna be able to blend as usual. I want to just do a little bit of rough toning with Copic markers. Just getting a little bit down in here, just to give a little bit more dimension. I find that if you have two similar colors, you can kind of blend them in a little bit, and so I always kind of hold them a little bit funky like this, and I kind of switch back and forth between the two of them. And then if I put a dark color down, I'll immediately take the light color and just kind of like pull it out. And this ink is still wet, so you can see it's getting on my Copic. And I like that. I like it being kind of like messy and weird and blendy. If you don't like that, which is totally your prerogative, you can actually get replacement nibs and have nice clean ones. Or if yours gets too dirty, you can kind of pop that out. I always like to put a little bit of a shadow in an eye. I think it really makes it pop. Everyone's got just a little bit of that going on in there. So in the era of the Darksaber, Sabine has some really cool gradiated sort of like purpley hair. So I'm gonna like get that effect a little bit. I'm putting my very, very light color down. It almost looks gray. A nice way to get those like little anime sort of like flecks is to, you know, push down and then pull up real quick on your brush. Sharpies are awesome. They're pretty, you can get them pretty much anywhere. A little bit of a copper Sharpie to give her these very glowy eyes. Maybe she needs a little bit of a lash. So now I've come back to this sort of starbird shape, and I'm gonna get ready to like cut this out a little bit. Because what we're doing with this is we're making this sort of like a weird graffiti element. And like I've said before, you gotta be authentic. You can always tell when something isn't a real graffiti. It looks like too clean or it's too brushy. And the only way to really get it is to actually kind of mess around. Alright, we've got our starbird. And I'm just gonna kind of like cut around this a little bit. I'm not being too precious about this because I want it to feel kind of gritty and weird. And you can see I'm gonna kind of like pop this over and under. And yeah, we could have just done that here or used masking fluid. That's another way you can totally do it. But I kind of want this to feel like one of the stickers that you see that people put on mailboxes. And yeah, it just kind of adds that sort of wheat paste feeling to this drawing. It's looking pretty cool. We've got this kind of streakiness going on. So, some glue. Just a little glue stick. Make sure it's not acidic or anything, because you want this to stay for the test of time. Gluing you down. And now I'm looking at this and I'm like, this was pretty cool, but what if I, you know, scratch out the edges a little bit? Alright, I see that there's some parts that interlock, which I like a lot, so I want to make those like pure pink. As you guys can tell, I'm pretty messy, but it's fun. I've got an anthology that I'm working on that's a sci-fi slice of life. My hub is the editor, and I'm doing a bunch of the illustration of the cover, and it'll be kickstarted, so definitely keep your eyes out for that. Alright. Looking kind of cool and weird. So here we are. You can see it's already kind of creating its own shadows, which is a lot of fun. I like that. I brought this cool stuff. It's called Letraset. Back in the day, graphic designers would take this and put it down on paper, and it's kind of how they would make some lettering happen. And you might be familiar with the concept if you ever look at manga. They do screen tones. This is pretty much the same thing. This is a cool old piece that I got, I think on Etsy for like a couple bucks. And I'm gonna put it down, and what it does is it rubs down the textures, which is really cool. And it just gives a little bit of an extra little nuance. Again, you could do this yourself, but it's kind of fun to grunge something up and make your own textures. So you can see one side is the sticky side, and the other side we're gonna rub against. I have this cool, it's actually for inking, it's a bamboo pen, but it's got a nice little tip to it. So I'm just gonna use this to like crunch out some of the stuff. And you can see, because this is so old, it gives that weird crackling effect all by itself. So this is like one of my big top secrets, and now you all know it. I'm not really putting much pressure at all. And when I lift it up, it's got all this like weird crackle going on. I'm always trying to find different ways to make interesting textures. And authentic ones as well. Now, you might think that's done, but really what you need to do is set this. So you can kind of use anything. I'm gonna find a blank piece of paper, and just kind of like rub it down. That should be pretty good. If I see some that are kind of cropping up, just kind of pat it down again. And you can see, like, if there's a little piece that you don't super love, you can kind of like scratch it away a little bit. But yeah, I think that's pretty rad. So now I'm going to go in for some finishing touches and do some highlights. I might put a little bit more dark in here and there if I feel like it. I really like to do highlights with a little bit of gouache. It's sort of like between acrylic and watercolor. It's not flowy like watercolor, and it's not quite as plasticky as acrylic, but you can add water to it and it'll get less opaque actually. And I have these brushes that I've beat up real good. They're real kind of messy. Even when you have a brush that's like your good brush, when your brush's life is over, it always has another life as a cool, grungy, inky brush. So don't get rid of your brushes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to thin out this gouache a little bit, and then we can do some cool effects with it. This brush, you can see, is kind of gnarly. I'm just going to dip it in some water, put a little water on my piece of paper in here. So I want this brush to be a little gross. I don't think it'll look cool if it's not. Another thing you can do too is kind of like spatter it, and you'll get like little bits and bobs. If you were a really fancy artist, you would definitely take masking fluid or masking tape, but I'm just getting my hand dirty. And you'll see as this dries, it's going to be a little less intense, which I like. It's just like a little bit of a hint. I'm going to go in with this little one. I'm going to do just a little bit of detail work on the hair. And this will probably absorb, so I'm not too worried if a little bit has more clumps than the other. My most favorite part, which I always try to save for last, is doing the eye highlights. That just gives your character an extra little pop. I always like to put a couple little wisps of hair, kind of out of place. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Miyazaki movies, but his characters, when they get really mad, their hair kind of starts going up and getting all electrified. And I love that. I think it's so cool. As an artist, you know, you're trying to portray emotion out of your own drawings. So using little devices like that is a great way to add drama and emotion to a scene that maybe normally wouldn't have it. No Sabine drawing would be complete without her signature. This is some more crink. This is a really gnarly, nasty kind that hopefully it'll go right. It's all, you can see it's all goopy and plasticky. It kind of looks like Venom, if you know that character. Hold it down, let it drip, let it drip. Maybe we'll do a little bit into the dark saber. Let it drip ever so slight. Yeah, there it goes. Just a little bit. My name is Annie Stoll, and I drew Sabine from Star Wars Rebels.